lifespan might be of her might be 6 weeks in a good year or a hard working year. So she lays the egg. What she does first is she goes out and she gathers pollen and nectar and makes a little blob of it and turns around and goes in this tube and lays the egg, and then she seals it up with mud, and she'll do this an egg or two a day for her whole life. So pollen is the meat for vegetarian bees. It gives them protein and fat, and the nectar is the quick energy. This is the food she collects for the egg. She will lay an egg or two a day, and that means she's going to visit up to 1,900 flowers a day to get the food she needs for the egg. So then she's doing this after her short lifespan. She dies. Now, let's go on because so okay, these are two together for some reason. So the plant on the left is a pieris. They come out in the spring. When you see them blooming, it's probably time for the mason bees to start coming out. Plums may be blooming, so look for that, like I said, when day temperatures are above 50 degrees. So on the right, there she is on some corn blocks, and you can see the yellow on her abdomen. It's a messy process. They get the pollen on the hairs on the bottom of their body. They're called scopa, and it drops off really easily. That's one of the reasons they're good pollinators, because they spread this pollen all over when they're traveling around. So here she is pollinating on the left. They prefer apples, pears, peaches, plums, cherries. And keep in mind, one visit is not enough. A bee may have to visit an individual flower 15 or 20 times before it's properly pollinated. And you can tell when you get fruit, if it's not properly pollinated, it might be misshapen, soft spots. So an apple, for example, with 8 seeds, that's well pollinated. 3 seeds, not so good, may not taste good, may not last. So these are busy bees doing a super big job. So on the right, this is a corn-based block for housing. You can make housing out of all kinds of things. We used to make them out of wood blocks, drilling holes in them. But we can't clean those out. And so we have a buildup of pollen mites. I'll show you pictures of that later. So you can do corn blocks, you can do a natural reed, which in my experience they like the best. They use them first. They're slightly different in shape and size, and females mark a hole where they're laying eggs by scent, and they recognize it by color and shape. They also like to go in cedar siding. You'll sometimes see them doing that. They don't hurt anything, and it's free housing. You can't clean it. So she goes in, she puts the food in, she lays the egg, and then she blocks the chambers off. Now, tubes should be around 6 inches, because what she does first is lay a female egg. And she lays female eggs, which are fertilized, and then she lays male eggs. So if there's predation on the outside, those ones get eaten first. In between chambers, she uses mud. So if you're going to have mason bees, you need some mud. So there she is with mud in her mouth. Now, on the right, this is a different kind of housing. This is me going, oh, I want them to fill all the holes, so I'm going to be kind of cheap on how much housing I put out. So then what they did is, in between the edge of my housing and my block of tubes, they filled it up. So then I couldn't get my block out, and these were vulnerable once I removed it. So they'll do that, but that's a lot more work. That's a lot more mud gathering. They're more vulnerable. But look on the lower left, you could see the little white grub, little black dots, that's some poop. It's getting ready to spin its cocoon, and then it will finish forming in that cocoon over the summer. So this, for me, even though it was a mistake I made, I was pretty excited to see what it looked like inside of there. Lookalikes, sort of. Fly. So the fly's got 2 wings. And I mean, they're cool, but they're not beautiful like the mason bee. She's got 4 wings, and her this one has tiny antenna, and she's got bigger antenna. So they do look kind of similar. I had a friend who got some from me and then didn't recognize when they started coming out of the box and said, I got all these flies. Well, but it didn't go too far. Anyway, so you can confuse them. And honeybee on the right, which we'll hear more about. They don't seem to conflict with each other. I've had them both. One of my neighbors has honeybees, and they just do their own thing. Another pollinator. I love these ones. They're so cute. They're little. They're the summer pollinators. This is a leaf cutter. They use the same housing, but they'd like it to be smaller. They'll come out after the mason bees have all gone. Now, things that can go wrong. These are pollen mites. This year I didn't clean them. She came out, and there were so many mites on her because she crawled through a tube that had mites in it. They are naturally occurring, but they eat the food that's meant for the egg, and then they stay in the chamber. And if you don't clean your tubes out, then the bees have to crawl through those, and they get coated with these mites. She could not fly. It was very sad. She was out there trying to rub it and get them off, and she really couldn't. So you don't have to make that mistake. You need to clean them in the fall. Another thing to protect from, this is a parasitic wasp. They lay their eggs in the bees. They're tiny. Woodpeckers, other birds that eat insects, these are grubs, yum yum. So you can do things to protect from these, this kind of predation. There's me. I was taking pictures. I was watching them. So these bees, the males don't have a stinger at all. The female does. I finally got stung after 16 years. I was being pesky, and I was up there taking pictures, and one dropped down my shirt, and she said, let me out. So I did. No problem, not a big deal. I don't think they cause anaphylactic reaction. I can't verify. You should check on that. But they're just sweet and gentle, and you get this. Lots of that. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie, and we're going to save questions for the end for both of our speakers. So next up we have Rob Greenstrad, beekeeper and owner of Beeworks Farm.
Thank you. Can I take this down? This is great. And how do I access that? Okay, here we go. Can you guys hear me? I can't hear me. Can I stand down here? Does that work for everyone? Okay. I've got one small prop I'm going to hand out. It's just a little acrylic block with some mites in it, and some varroa mites. These are specific to honeybees, not mason bees, and they just cause a lot of trouble. I'll mention them later, but I'm just going to pass it around here. Will someone, when you're the last person to get this, will you make sure I get it back at the end, please? There you go. Okay, so I'm going to see if I can match what you want to hear about honeybees in 10 minutes or less. So I thought I'd talk about the reproduction of a honeybee colony. And here's a picture. I think those are my first 2 hives I ever had. But in nature, you have a honeybee colony living in a tree. You got 2 of them on Earth, and a bear comes and tears one down. The colony has to reproduce somehow, right? Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about. don't have my slides in the best order, so I'm going to give myself a little reminder here of where we're at. Oops, I'm going to go backwards. It's not going backwards for me.
Oh, now you've done it.
Okay, first thing I just want to mention, a lot of people want to help with the bees and hear about honeybees dying. It's in the news a lot. And if you want to help with bees, let your flowers in your yard and ditches grow. Let the blackberries grow, let the dandelions grow. What honeybees don't need out there is more people to host honeybee colonies in their yards and just sort of let them be. They end up being sort of vectors of disease out there for others, and it doesn't really help the bees at all. So anyway, that's my 2 cents worth on that. So when this colony comes out of winter, it successfully made it through. It had enough winter stores of honey and all of this. And you get past the winter solstice and the temperature starts coming up. The queen starts laying a little bit of eggs. I've got some pictures here of eggs right here. They look like tiny grains of rice sitting on end in the backs of the cells. And they will start bringing along a little brood nest. And as the food starts coming in April, I'll just talk about for the Northwest, but in April the dandelions bloom and the maples, and they keep bringing in nectar and pollen. That's what they feed the larvae. And the honeybee colony gets bigger and bigger, and pretty soon the colony decides it's going to split, and it's going to do what nature does and reproduce and make more colonies, so that the colonies that got lost to disease or bears or what have you get replaced. And so those are some larvae about 4 or 5 days old. This is a mite. This is a honeybee hatching. And this is a swarm. And so eventually they get to a point where they have so much brood, so much resources, they're kind of packed in there. And just before this time, they know that they're starting to get crammed for space. They got lots of bees, lots of brood, lots of groceries inside. And they start rearing a couple of queens. And so they basically feed these larvae a different diet. And when the queen is about to emerge or has emerged, the colony will swarm. And I've got a couple of pictures. This is a picture of a swarm just sitting in a tree after it's flown out of the hive. And I've got 2 where they've... Did I do it again? Oh, I saved it. Sorry, I hope this doesn't make y'all dizzy going through this. This is a swarm descending on a bunch of boxes on the back of my truck. This is a swarm up in the air, but when they come out of when it's springtime and it's time to swarm, this colony basically splits in half, and usually the old queen and about half the bees will come out of the box like a tornado, and there's 10, 15,000 bees flying around in a giant area about half the size of the indoor of this place. And they will usually just travel sometimes 20 feet, 50 feet, 200 feet, 1,000 feet to some tree, and they all descend on it and they cluster together. And then over the course of a couple of hours or a day or 2 or 3, scout bees will go and look for a suitable new home. And they have a bit of debate and argue over what's the best home. And then at some point, they just all take off out of this, cluster, turn into a giant tornado again, and fly off and start the whole thing over again. Let me back up to... And so this is a nice colony of bees here. This is a queen laying eggs, just right there in the center. And just for a little quiz, so inside a colony, how many different types of bees are there? Does anybody know? There's 3 types. There's a queen, there's drone bees, and then there's worker bees. The queen's a female, the worker bees are female, and the drones are male. And the male's job in life, or their only destiny is to like wake up every day, and if the temperature gets warm enough and they feel like it, they head outdoors and they see if they can mate. And if they're successful at mating, they die within a couple of hours or that day, and that's it for them. And otherwise, they don't really have a utility or use around the colony that they live in. I think that's mostly it about a reproducing colony. So if we want, we can get to questions. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Rob and Valerie. Give them a hand. Open it up for questions. Questions? Hi, how are you?
So I have a question about the honeybees. So you were talking about them swarming and going to a tree and like hanging out and finding a new place to be. In nature, where are they actually going? I've only associated them with, the hives that are man-made.
Yeah, so I'll repeat the question so you can all hear. After they come out and swarm, and then they're looking for a new home, where do they actually go to find that home? And sometimes they'll go to other people's beekeeping equipment that's empty because it smells like a good place to have a home. But frequently it'll be like in the knothole of like a cottonwood tree, or in a little knothole in the side of your house. There are an awful lot of beehives that end up like between the studs in the side of a house or barn. But prior to like these kinds of structures, it was usually just the hollows of trees.
Thank you. Who else had a question? I saw some hands up.
On the mason bees, when the queen stung you, does she die like a honeybee would die after she stings you? Not a queen honeybee, but does the mason bee die after the sting?
No. And all the females are queens.
And in, so would you say 16 years and you were only stung one time?
Yes.
Other bee questions?
Yes, other than dandelions, which I'm very adept at growing, what other kind of flowers do you recommend for honeybees?
Fruit trees are great. Everything only blooms for 4 or 5 weeks, so there's no one particular thing. But if you could let the blackberries, the dandelions, usually people leave the maples alone. Fireweed's this tall pink plant that grows in patches along ditches and whatnot. And then there's Scotch broom, wild rose, and star thistle, and regular thistles. But if you're going to plant something, borage is a prolific honey plant, and it's like a little blue thing and fuzzy, and bees just go crazy for it.
Can I put an add-on to that? Our native plant sale is coming up on March 23rd at Whatcom Community College, and Emily Hirsch, she's actually going to be speaking next, knows all the best pollinator plants that are our native species, and we'll be selling them at conservation grade plants, very low cost. Meet us at the community college, 2 weeks, March 23rd. That was my plug. Okay, other questions? I saw your first.
Do you save some of the honey to give to the bees if they run out? Is there such a thing as that?
There is such a thing as that. If you look at that picture of the beehives in the snow there, the bees live in that all year round, and there's enough room for them to have a brood nest and have 100 pounds of honey packed around them, and that'll get them through the winter no problem. When you see beehives getting taller and taller, it's still just one colony of bees in there. They're putting on these honey supers where they'll keep putting the honey higher and higher and higher up there, and that's what you can harvest. And they won't put the honey way up there until they put a whole bunch of honey in their brood boxes for winter. So at the end of the summer, when we pull honey off, there's still huge stores of honey for the bees.
Great question, thank you.
Do you have bee packages available?
I don't sell bee packages, really. Yeah. Russell, who's right behind you on that side, maybe you can raise your hand, Russell. he also keeps bees up in this area, and he probably has also some connections where he might be able to get bees.
So if we wanted to get mason bees in the area for your vegetable garden or orchard, would just putting up a nesting box be the best thing to do?
So usually people buy the live bees. They're still hibernating right now. I have some at my shop. And then put out the housing and let them do their thing. Although you should not put them out on a hot day, because sometimes you put out the hibernating bees and they go from mid-30s to mid-50s and they all fly away. So do it in the evening. Okay, a couple more. I'm gonna go in the back here.
To prevent them from swarming, do you split the hives in the springtime?
Yes, that's a great question. So when you're keeping bees, there's a whole bunch of things you can do to kind of interfere with that. And one is to split the hive and then re-queen the part that has the old queen, because at some point they're going to swarm, but they're just like, bent on doing that every year. And so, yes, that's exactly right. Or you can just re-queen it. And always make sure that there's plenty of room in the hive. Because the minute they feel cramped, then they decide that there's too many of them living in one house, and they'll split.
Okay, one more question here.
I hear a lot about mites as being a big issue. Could you speak to, in terms of honeybees, could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I heard on the news that this year was the biggest loss of honeybees in 10 years, and most of it due to varroa mites. And hopefully you guys get to see those. They look like they're little 8-legged creatures. And they pass viruses along to the bees, in addition to just preying on the bees and sucking on their hemolymph. Usually this occurs late in the summer. And people will be successful at having their bees clear through the spring and summer, and then late summer the mite load, the mites reproduce on the bee brood. And usually by late in the summer, if you don't do something to interfere with the mites, I guess the number of mites in a colony, they'll frequently collapse the whole colony. And then what happens is once a colony is a certain amount weakened or gone, other honeybees in the area will come. They just know that, and they will come take all the resources out of there. They'll take all the pollen and all the honey back to their own hive. And at that moment, all the mites crawl on these robbing bees, and they go back to all these different hives, and it just keeps going on. The only time the mites aren't really, increasing their numbers in a colony is like late fall and winter, when the bees aren't, bringing along brood of their own. And so it's very, very important to just manage mites. So, like, if you're going to keep bees at home on your place, this is great, but do something about mites. There's a bunch of different medications you can treat mites with that are successful, and there's probably a list of 30 or 40 products you can use on bees that are generally safe. Some of them don't work very well anymore. Some work very well. Some people are still experimenting with, but there are things you can use to kill the mites.
Let's just take one more question back here in the back. Oh gosh, I'm coming in.
What is the bee's natural defense against mites?
That's a great question. Honeybees are not native to here, and which is why neither are the blackberries, which is why blackberries seem to be very important to the bees. In the years that the bees have a lot of food, and we have lots of food through late in the summer, and then we get a cool fall and they quit rearing brood, we frequently have less mite problems. The years where it's hot and dry and the food dries up middle of the summer and the fall continues to be warm and they keep bringing along brood, we have bigger mite problems. Their natural defense, they can clean themselves of the mites a little bit and they will tear up brood that has mites on it somewhat, but there aren't currently enough, I guess, colonies of bees that are capable of doing this.